Daniel Tucker. I'm the Director of Museum Studies here at the University of the Arts. Welcome to UArts. Glad that you all are here. This is the first installment of a new series called the UArts Museums Forum. We've got some alumni here, we've got current students, we've got faculty, we've got prospective students in the room, and also on our kind of very deep amount of people on the live stream. So thanks for joining us on the live stream. And so, part of the goal of this series is to build and continue building this rich community that exists kind of in and around and beyond this graduate program. Our hope is that the series will be a resource for this department as well as for practitioners in Philly and beyond. And we hope also that you'll mark your calendars for the second event in this series, which is happening on April 17th, which is called From Me to We, Curating Collective History Through Solo Retrospectives, which is going to be also part of the Refocus Philadelphia event series focused on women in the visual arts, taking place this spring. So when this particular event was initiated in the fall, it really emerged out of a few questions that were interrelated and disparate, and they include really kind of a question around what does public engagement look like through a narrative lens, which is one of the ways that we framed this event around storytelling practices that exist in the museum and exhibition field. We also wanted to look at what can be learned from practitioners who are working on different scales. So we can think about individual practitioners, mid-sized nonprofits, and large institutions in dialogue with one another, which is who the esteemed panel that we have joined with us tonight. And then finally, more precisely related to the theme of this event, which if you're in the wrong event, this is called Storytelling and Climate, How Museums and Exhibitions Narrate Crisis. Okay, so if that's what you came for, you're in the right place. So more precisely related to that theme is we want to look at what are the range of practices that are being experimented with to bring the urgency of climate crisis into the space of exhibitions and events in museums and related institutions. I'm about to hand it off, but I want to give a few thanks. So this event would not be possible without the support of the Graduate and Professional Studies Dean, Erin Ellman, our staff, Melissa and Christian, who many of you met when you walked in, Peter and Vincent, who are doing AV tonight, and Jeff from Otis, who helped us out in setting up the event, Maria, Mia, and Ryan, who helped us with the graphic design and promotion of the event, UArts Catering and Security, our sister programs of Art Ed and Museum Exhibition Planning and Design are also integral partners for museum studies, and so thanks to those faculty and students for being here as well. And for those of you also that are here thinking about graduate school, I encourage you to meet with me or the other program directors before our February 15th application deadline. And thanks for being here. I'm gonna let our esteemed moderator provide some framing for the panel, but in order to facilitate you getting oriented on the rest of the bios of the incredible speakers, you can use this QR code to read their full bios, and we're really excited to have Joyce, Marina, Whitney, and Ashlyn here, as well as Jayatri Das, who is our moderator tonight. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Jayatri Das, who is the Director of Science, Content, and Chief Bioscientist at the Franklin Institute. She's led the development of several exhibitions at the Institute, including Your Brain, a national award-winning exhibit about neuroscience and psychology of the human brain. So please join me in welcoming Jayatri and the rest of the panel. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. And I'm so honored by the invitation to moderate this amazing panel tonight. As my title belies, I am a scientist, and what really excites me about the conversation tonight is that we're going to be talking about telling stories involving science with no one else who's a scientist. That's so cool. So this is the reason that I got into museums, is because I'm an evolutionary biologist by training. And so when it comes to the science that I care about most passionately, which is evolution, the environment, the world around us, we know that people's understanding of science is shaped not just by the science itself, but by their personal and community values. And that's where these different lenses come into play. And so I'm excited to hear how all of these amazing people are interpreting science through each of their own personal, community, and institutional lenses. So, climate change, right? It's real, it's us, it's bad, experts agree, but there's hope. The Yale program on climate communication identified these 5 core principles as the key messages that everybody should know about climate change. And it's easy to see why the first 4 matter, right? Because understanding the science, the extent of the phenomenon, and the scientific consensus around it really matters for developing solutions to this crisis, especially looking at new developments in science and technology. But that 5th principle, that there's hope, is probably the most important, because that's what motivates us to act. And what matters even more is that because climate change is a global crisis, it requires collective action, which is an even bigger challenge to motivate. Several years ago, our team at the Franklin Institute began a 4-city project called the Climate and Urban Systems Partnership, and shout out to anybody from CUSP who is here in the audience tonight, either here or online. And one of the goals of that project was to identify characteristics of community learning experiences that encourage hope and climate action. So what did we find? We found that first, that climate change has to be connected to local systems, like weather, transit, energy, things that help people appreciate the complexity of the issue, but also help them understand that action can take many forms. Second, we found that climate learning has to be framed for personal relevance, tied to people's direct lived experience, and meeting people where they are with both their understanding and their emotions around the issue. And finally, what we found was that participation is key, that hands-on, authentic experiences and rich conversations shared among people with different sources of knowledge create opportunities to build human connections and generate solutions together. So all of this ties into the question that brings us here tonight. What role can museums play in cultivating a culture of hope and action to tackle climate change and improve community and planetary health? And this is the focus as well of a new initiative that's been put out by the Association of Science Technology Centers called Seeding Action. And Seeding Action lays out 3 strategic approaches for museums. First is to ensure that operations, pedagogy, and community presence benefit planetary health, that we're kind of walking the walk. Second, that we strengthen connections with our local communities, environmental and civic groups, and the private sector to enable action, that we're the nexus of a whole community hub that can galvanize action together. And finally, that we lead a cultural shift to normalize solutions-oriented and hopeful messages about planetary health and to create diverse opportunities for public participation in solutions. And you might pick up on the fact that this messaging is using the framing of planetary health, and we can talk about why that might matter as well. But what do these strategies look like in action? Our speakers today are leading work at their respective organizations and in their communities that channel these principles, whether we're looking at exhibitions, public engagement and co-creation, infrastructure planning, public policy, and more. Through our discussion, we're going to learn about their approaches and explore some of the common themes between them for storytelling to inspire that community participation and action. So I asked each of our speakers to offer some reflections on a particular idea to introduce us to their work and philosophy. We'll hear these brief thoughts from each one of them, and then we'll dive into a deeper conversation. And as we proceed through that conversation, I invite all of you to think of your questions and add them to our discussion. For those of you in our live audience, we'll have microphones during the Q&A session, so please feel free to just raise your hand and chime in. If you're listening online, we'll give you a cue to put your questions in the chat. You're a little bit behind us, so we'll try and get as many of those questions consolidated and then bring them into the discussion at once. So without further ado, our first speaker is Joyce Chung, curator at the Asian Arts Initiative. She's brought her interest and experience in contemporary community-based art to installations about humans and our impact on changing landscapes and environments. I asked Joyce to share her thoughts on how the intersection of art and science allows the exploration of different narratives and cultural relevance. So, Joyce.
Thank you, Jayatri, for the introduction, and thank you, Daniel. Thank you, UArts, for having me tonight and organizing such a beautiful panel tonight. Yeah, nice to meet you, everybody. I'm the curator at Asian Arts Initiative. Asian Arts Initiative is a multidisciplinary art center. We've been around 31 years, since 1994. We do a lot of cool stuff, including exhibitions, performances, film screening, book talks. Recently, we are expanding our programs to music concerts. So I'm gonna talk about one of the programs that we presented last year. It's a multi-year research-based public art project called Invasive Species. So has anybody not been to the rail park here? So Rail Park in Philadelphia is a Philadelphia version of High Line. It used to be an abandoned rail line, and now going through a transformation into a public space. But it's only a small portion of it is open to the public because of a lot of reasons, including budget. So it's basically untouched green urban landscape in the center of the city of Philadelphia. And this is a place that we presented our project called The Cut. It runs parallel to Kellow Hill Street from North Broadway to the 18th Street. It's a sub-street level open air green space, not open to the public. So we started this project with this question: is all non-native species invasive? So let's think about the invasive species first. It refers to an organism that it's not native, not indigenous to a particular area. And a lot of times it has a negative connotation because it's disruptive. It disrupts the existing ecosystem. But this anti-sentiment of invasive species simplifies native and non-native into frames of perpetrator and victims. And there are a lot of, then if we really look into it, there's a lot of subtleties and nuances that we are missing. So we really wanted to explore this artistic relationships with the specific geopolitical context of climate change, including land and ecosystem in our community. So we reached out to, we work with a lot of collaborators and local partners in Philadelphia to realize this project. So in 2021, we reached out to Dr. Ashley Gripper, who's currently an assistant professor at Drexel. At that time, she was finishing her PhD degree in environmental health science at Harvard University. She also founded Land-Based Yuns. It's an organization in North Philadelphia who provide education and training to Black women on agriculture and land-based living with the focus on our relationships with the land. But she's not coming from art background, so she reached out to Sonia Gallagher, who's an artist based in Philadelphia. She's also a member of Soil Generation. It's a collective of Black and brown women, female farmers in North Philadelphia with a mission to share resources, grow food together, and protect the land. So Sonia and Ashley conducted research at the cut for like 2 years, collected information about flora and fauna, or like diverse plant life and wildlife in the cut. And there's one time I went into the cut with them, and then I saw this huge shedded snake skin and dead animal bodies. It was really wild. So initially, really, we wanted to open up the cut to the public and do some outdoor exhibition. But then for everyone's safety and security, we had to pivot, and we reached out to Eto Tikye, who's an interdisciplinary artist, working in a lot of different medium, including painting, sculpture, performance, new media. He's a professor at Brooklyn College, but then last year he was doing a residency in West Philadelphia, living in Philadelphia. And he's particularly interested in transforming cultural and historical references into biomorphic forms and patterns that reference nature. So he was the perfect artist to work with. So based on what Sonia and Ashley, their research at the cut, Eto realized, translated their research into visual language using augmented reality. So at the cut, we presented this huge augmented reality image with the QR code. So if you scan the QR code and using your phone, and then if you scan it around the cut area, you get to see this whole like plant life and flora and fauna, the images that Eto translated with augmented reality. Well, and as an entail of the project, we also presented an indoor exhibition at our AI gallery. We invited local artists, and they produced the work in response to the ecosystem that we found at in the cut. It really opened up an opportunity for us to talk about the ecosystem, biodiversity, and climate change, but we also realized that the narrative is not just limited to the nature. We can also apply the same concept to the human society in terms of migration, physical and cultural migration. And maybe like migration is not necessarily a bad thing. It adds dynamic to the existing environment, and maybe we should think about how we can coexist or with the new communities, with the new people. So it really helped us to think about how to reimagine the conditions of immigrants and what social conditions of life that has entailed. Yep, that's it. That's what I prepared for today.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks so much, Joyce. What a beautiful virtual installation. And it actually really reminds me of some research I was just reading this week about how our approach to even thinking about endangered species conservation is changing, so that it's no longer just we need to go back to preserving its natural habitat. It's thinking about how do humans and different species coexist and balance each other out. And so I really love how your art is inspiring that dialogue. Our next speaker, Ashlyn Pentecost Farron, takes a different approach to interpretation. The Climate Crisis Heritage Project builds bridges between past, present, and future of human impact on our climate. And so I asked Ashlyn to think about how do historical narratives contribute to building awareness and urgency of the current crisis and help inspire community action. Ashlyn?
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to share the stage with you guys. Thanks, Geoffrey. So I'm an artist and public historian, and I've been working with history museums for the past 2 years to develop a public historical narrative of the climate crisis. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that, and then answer your question as best I can. So heritage sites and history museums are, I think, a little bit behind art and science museums and talking about the crisis, but they are slowly but surely increasingly addressing it. And from what I've seen so far, they're talking about it in two main ways. One, they're talking about sustainability in their own operations and kind of talking about how they're changing what they're doing, changing their energy sources, and kind of narrating that for the public. And they're also talking about its effects, and this is what I've seen the most with history museums. If they're talking about climate change, they're talking about how it's impacting their historic buildings or their collections or their, sometimes even their communities, but that's something that they have really taken on as a narrative. And so these are both great narratives that they have in common with other types of museums, talking about sustainability, talking about impact. But my work is focused on the third type of climate narrative, telling the history of how we got into this crisis. I came to this because I was noting that climate scientists talk about climate history all the time. They're pointing to industrialization as a major turning point in carbon emissions, and industrialization is a historical phenomenon. It happened at different times, in different places, with all kinds of economic, social, and cultural implications, and deep historical precedents. And climate scientists, of course, are not really getting into this in their papers. That's not their job. But luckily, there's a whole heritage profession that has devoted itself to preserving and telling history. And as a field, we've preserved countless sites and objects that are part of the history of the climate crisis. So, for example, up in the top left is Iron Bridge, which is a historic site in England where they perfected smelting iron with coal, giving it the reputation as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. Stenton, the other one on the top, is here in Philadelphia. It's an estate that belonged to James Logan, who manipulated the Lenape, who are the indigenous people of this area, out of over 1 million acres of land that then became the Lehigh Valley, which became one of the earliest and largest industrial corridors in the United States. Lowell, down here, is a national park site in Massachusetts. It's almost the whole town, and it was the first planned industrial city in the United States, and so the national park sort of tells that story. And then the Elms down here on the right is the historic house museum where you can take tours. It was the summer home of a coal baron that controlled most of United States bituminous coal around the turn of the 20th century, when you really see that sort of hockey stick shape emerge. So all of these stories are central to understanding how climate change happened. However, I've had a very hard time finding a history museum that connects these histories to the climate for the public. So I've been trying to seed the heritage field with climate history through demonstration projects, art commissions, presentations like this, conversations. And these are actually all museums that I'm following or working with as they take initial steps towards incorporating climate change history into their public narrative. So this is possible. I've found many history museums that are interested in this. They just need some help figuring out how to do it. So Gayatri, you asked me how historic narratives can help build awareness and agency and inspire action. And I think telling climate history has the most unique contributions to this last category. First of all, climate crisis history helps the public understand what exactly happened, so we can support some kind of reverse engineering and change. Secondly, as you were also mentioning, research has shown that spreading dire warnings about climate catastrophe can shut people down, and you really need to have a clear and inspiring message about what to do. And climate crisis history is in part the history of the last energy transition, when we moved from wood and water and animal power into using fossil fuel, which also caused a huge acceleration in sort of consumption overall. And this history shows us how quickly energy sources can change and how rapidly an economy and a whole society can reorganize around new energy sources. It shows how climate response is a social project, not only a project for scientists and technocrats kind of over there. And I think we need to circulate these stories of the last transition as achievable and inspirational as we try to accomplish a similar feat today. Finally, climate history is essential for climate justice. For one, there are some serious issues with the last energy transition, who benefited and who it cost. And we need to tell those histories so as we take action, we're not replacing one system of inequality with another. But in addition, America's failure to acknowledge its historically outsized contributions to the crisis has been holding back international cooperation for 30 years. So climate crisis narratives, in a historical sense, are both about inspiration and about acting with collective responsibility. So we'll talk more.
Thanks so much, Ashlyn. It's so fascinating to see how your work really spans all of the different scales of these narratives, from these global social movements all the way down to, historic places are really a place where we can imagine ourselves in someone's shoes. And that's such a powerful way to think about all of those systems that intersect when it comes to energy and climate, and thinking about what it was like then to what it's like now to what it could be in the future. So cool. All right, so our third speaker, Whitney McGuire, is going to expand our lens to bring in museum operations and facilities. So a little bit of what Ashlyn started to introduce, but we're gonna dig in. As the Guggenheim's Associate Director of Sustainability, she's leading the implementation of a collaborative, cross-disciplinary sustainability plan across the institution. But while elements of this initiative are internally focused, clearly there's a strong external message to be told as well. So my question to Whitney was, how do you connect operational practices for sustainability to public narratives oriented around climate action and justice? Whitney.
Thank you, Jayatri. Thank you all for your presence today. I'm so honored to be a panelist among you all. I've already learned so much, so thank you. I am the Associate Director of Sustainability at the Guggenheim, and I'm the inaugural Associate Director of Sustainability. So I'm the first to thank you. I didn't mean that to elicit, to toot my own horn. I'm saying that being the first is often, I would say not gratuitous, but you all just gave me an applause, so thank you. Part of my work is really figuring out how to tell the story of the work that we have been doing for the better part of 4 years. And it's really interesting that I agreed to be on a panel about storytelling, because this is only until recently a decision that we made to kind of amplify the work that we're doing publicly, because we wanted to make sure that everything that we were working on internally was reflected authentically to our stakeholders and to the communities that we serve as a museum. So the question about the public narrative of the climate crisis is really interesting, and I think the advantage that we have is that our sustainability program or initiative began really at a grassroots level. It's still led by employees, but it was based on their perception of sustainability and sort of the responses we were getting to, how can the question of how can museums respond responsibly to the climate crisis. Museums are, spaces of cultural heritage preservation. They are spaces to inspire imagination, but they are also places that need to be held accountable, right? So our employees are very aware of that responsibility. So we conducted a staff survey in 2019, and about 90% of our staff mentioned that sustainability was their top priority. And from there, we were able to create a green team of volunteers who represented almost all of our departments in the institution, and they were able to create a momentum and begin this cultural embedding of sustainability throughout the museum across all levels of the institution. So I say that because having a grassroots foundation is really important for the work that we are amplifying to be received, and also for it to reflect the authenticity that is embedded within this work that's happening on the ground. So we were fortunate to receive a nice infusion of support, financial support, from our board president, Wendy Fisher, and her foundation, Kirsch Foundation. And that really helped us seed this work and substantiate it so that it could grow legs, really, or roots. In 2021, our green team was fully formed. We had a consultant, an external consultant, kind of help us with the internal strategic plan for our sustainability program. And in 2022, we were able to develop a budget and a fundraising strategy and implementation of our sustainability kind of roadmap to 2030, which created an opening for a dedicated role for sustainability. And that's where I came in 2023. It's been about a year now that I've been in this role. And I'm really focused on responding to this idea of museums being accountable to the communities that we serve. And I've onboarded a comms firm to help with that strategy, because I am not a communication strategist. But it really is important for us to take this idea of we're drawing down our carbon emissions, we're tracking our waste, we're tracking our water, but we're not patting ourselves on the back. We know that we have so much more to do, and we are learning from our peers in this sector, peers in other sectors, so that we can hold each other accountable as we do this work. Our carbon studies for our exhibitions have been the most public-facing aspect of our work over the past 3 years. We've been tracking our carbon emissions for exhibitions for 3 years now, and we've launched 3 more simultaneously this year. It's too much. Wish me luck. But you know, that comes with a certain level of we have to consider the ways in which we are telling the story of data and science-based targets, and how that is being communicated to stakeholders from elementary school children who come to the museum through our education department, all the way up to our trustees. So that's still a work in progress. I don't have any answers for you right now, and I love that. I love that this is still a space that is growing, that is open to collaboration, and I'm really looking forward to the next few years as we're focusing on not just our, an operational aspect of sustainability, but also our programmatic commitment to sustainability as well, which is really where that storytelling can benefit our work. So that's all. Oh, I didn't share more of my slides, but I'm not done, actually. We created sustainability principles that really reflect this commitment, this grassroots commitment, and also reflects my sentiment that we are not fully formed yet. we have a long way to go. So we question everything, we foster collaboration, we consider timing, we think forward, we track our progress, and we educate and illuminate. And I would also add that we have fun, because that's really important for this work. And also it's helpful because people are volunteering their time on the green team to do this work. So it's really important that they have an incentive to stay. So this is an example of the fun that we have. This is one of our Museum Mile activations, and some members of our teen programs through our education department at last year's Museum Mile. So hopefully you all can come to the Guggenheim and, you know, hold me accountable, please. And I look forward to learning more from my colleagues here. Thank you.
Whitney, I really love your narrative that is focused on the process of change, you know, rather than maybe foregrounding outcomes that may or may not be achievable. Because I think one of the common threads that many museums and cultural sites are dealing with is that we have our own, you know, historical challenges to deal with, whether it's cultural or institutional or literally physical, right? In our case, the Franklin Institute is a 1934 building attached to a heavily value engineered 1990 building attached to a 2014 building, and yeah, coming up with a sustainability narrative is a mess. But thinking about that process of change, I think, is a really cool place to start. All right, so finally, last but not least, we'll hear from Marina McDougall, Vice President of Experience and Engagement at the Academy of Natural Sciences. Marina brings an interdisciplinary artistic perspective to a museum whose mission encompasses both active scientific research and public education to apply new knowledge to real-world problems. So my question to Marina was, how are museums in a unique position to connect community awareness and action to public policy? So let's scale up. Marina.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for the invitation to participate in this really great panel, and to UArts Museum Program. It's really nice to be here. And to these incredible panelists, I feel like I'm going to make some new friends. I'm really inspired. So museums play an invaluable role in civic life and public imagination. Through surveys, we know that museums consistently rank among the most trusted institutions in the US, second only to family and friends. Could that be possible? So this is a rare and precious status, particularly in our time when creating space for open public exchange and discussion has become so challenging. Museums have the ability to bring people together, diverse, intergenerational publics, interdisciplinary contributors, and community partners. Museums can also frame complex, multidimensional issues, concepts, and ideas in compelling ways. Museums of all scales are in the unique position to serve as vital public platforms to increase awareness around the interrelated issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental justice, and to galvanize action towards positive solutions, which is, I love that hope is the focus of our conversation tonight. So I want to share some recent projects that lean into the Academy's values to fulfill our strategic goal of deepening impact, enabling solutions. So one of our key strategic aims goes right to the heart of Jayatri's question. So with the hope that these projects will stimulate ideas for our discussion about methods and approaches, strategies and practices. So beginning in 2020, and I was just joining the Academy a little bit later, we initiated thematic years tied to 4 value statements. And many of you might recall a moment in the cultural zeitgeist when, at long last, it became vital for science institutions to assert their position on key sustainability issues of our day, such as climate change. So for the Academy, these themes have become year-long explorations and public conversations related to core areas of scientific research at the Academy. So 2021 was climate year. Oops, I gotta catch us up here. we go. During this year, we presented the exhibition Gideon Mendel, Drowning World, featuring the artist's 10-year project documenting people from around the world experiencing extreme flooding events. The exhibition draws upon our common sense of humanity to show how climate change can affect anyone. This point was reinforced when Hurricane Ida struck Philadelphia, bringing a deluge to Highway 676 right outside the Academy's doors. So we incorporated crowdsourced videos capturing local flooding in an associated display. During the same year, we worked with Eastwick United, a neighborhood activist group to address catastrophic flooding in their South Philadelphia neighborhood. And the Academy's part of Drexel University, and so we worked with Drexel engineering faculty and students who had been working with Eastwick community members to imagine and model solutions, and they presented their work in our ongoing issues-based series, Academy Town Square, drawing important media attention. So soon after, Eastwick United received a federal grant to further study the issue. So we like to think we played our little part in that. So 2022, and I have to say, like, climate continues, we called it climate year, but we continue to think about climate change and do programming around it. But 2022 was water year. So the highlight was the Academy's first public artwork, developed in collaboration with the Academy's Patrick Center for Environmental Research, which does work on waterway health. And they work together with the experiential theater group New Paradise Labs, which is led by Whit McLaughlin and Pete Angevine, who worked with the artist Laya and many other contributors. So the group developed a playful, lyrical, interactive adventure walk in the neighborhood immediately adjacent to the Academy to inspire watershed thinking. The walk, which culminated at the edge of the Schuylkill, included some 40 unique experiences along the way, bringing awareness to how our built environment is designed in relation to the flows of water. The walk revealed how roads and sidewalks cover over the buried waterway Minnow Run, which is like the source of it was kind of right under Logan Circle, and you can still find signs of water pooling in the Academy's basement even, related to this buried stream. And the walk took people down towards the Schuylkill, and in this image I think you can see a trustee showing where the high water mark of the Hurricane Ida, when the Schuylkill flooded, came up to like almost like shoulder height. We also worked with the sound artists Anea Lockwood and Liz Phillips and New Paradise Labs to create a listening pavilion along the river called Inside the Watershed. So the project brought publics into greater connection with this vital Philadelphia waterway. And so last year, 2023, was Biodiversity Year, and in that year we created the exhibition Conversations with Birds. So Conversations with Birds centered around the vital role of community science in advancing scientific understanding. The exhibition, which we considered a prototype for our future Urban Nature Lab, a public and learning environment that we hope will bring Philadelphians into closer connection with the social and natural dynamics underlying our local ecologies. Conversations with Birds grew from both the Academy's avian research in our ornithology department, as well as the co-created event Excellence in Black Birding that we convened in 2020 on the heels of the Christian Cooper incident in Central Park. The event celebrates diversity of participation in the natural world and is happening again in May, and Christian Cooper will be our guest speaker, so yeah, make sure to come. As a thematic year, Biodiversity Year was designed to bring greater public attention to a core aspect of Academy science, the study of the variety and distribution of living things and the measurement of biodiversity as a critical means of gauging environmental health. Through the exhibition, which reflected our avian research and its connections to a wide network of conservation groups, diverse and avid birding organizations, and the campaign community science project Lights Out Philly, we generated greater awareness among our publics of both local bird populations and the extraordinary migrators that fly through the region biannually. Through the exhibition and its daily facilitation, and Mary Bailey, a graduate from UArts, is here tonight, and she leads that amazing group that does the media-aided experiences at the Academy. We describe the challenges that our avian companions face due to habitat loss, pollution, climate change, domesticated pets, and other factors, and the ways that researchers, urban planners, architects, conservationists, policymakers, and everyday citizens are working to study birds, steward their care, and mitigate against devastating bird population loss during this critical time in what has been described as the 6th extinction. So at the heart of the project was the story, and this goes back to your question, Jayatri, around narrative. There was a tragic event where thousands of birds were just taking flight during a seasonal migration, and they became disoriented during a storm and struck the windows of City Center skyscrapers. The group Bird Safe Philly was formed with the Academy leading a number of organizations, including the Building Managers Association, in an effective campaign to turn off the lights at night during migratory season. So every year in the fall and in the spring, when it's migration season and you happen to notice the lights out in the downtown area, that's part of that cool program. So I hope these projects exemplify how museums can inspire awareness and bring about change, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina. It's so cool to, I was familiar with a number of the exhibits, but then to learn about how they connect to things that we're seeing going on in the city is so cool and really speaks to the impact that the Academy has had. So it's so cool that you can measure the outcomes of what you're doing, and I want to get into that a little bit later. My hope through our discussion is, I find each of your work so incredibly inspiring on its own, but ideally what we want to get at here is to start to identify threads that can be applied to the field in general. And so my questions will start to kind of poke at some of your work to pull out what might be principles that we can all take away from each of the projects that you've done. And so I wanted to start out with what might be like the most common language of museums, which is exhibits and programs. And when we talk about narrative, often our minds jump to storytelling through words. But design is also such an important piece of creating a compelling narrative. So when you think about the exhibits, the programs that you're all working on, are there elements of design, either strategic design, program design, or visual design, that you rely on to really create that feeling of participation, that it's not just sort of the static exhibit that you're looking at, but really something that we're all part of together? And Joyce, maybe I'll ask you to start for that question.
Yeah, thank you for the question, a wonderful question. So I think for invasive species, we try to incorporate a lot of interactive and participatory elements into our programs. We presented sound performance, based on the sound we collected in the cut. We invited musicians to transform them into a sound beat, and then we projected onto the building facade of CCP parking lot that's adjacent to the cut. And we also presented virtual avatar workshop where the artists teach people how to use the tool to create your own online virtual avatar. So through these different kinds of activities and art forms, we try to create these holistic experiences so that people engage in the topic more and then develop their experience around it.
Marina, I might ask you to pick up on that thread, because some of the installations that you showed us are incredibly interactive in that space. How did you work with artists to kind of motivate that design strategy?
Yeah, well, I just think that consideration of, the multisensorial, just people needing to come at things in just so many different kinds of ways. I mean, I think the How to Get to the River was really great in that way, in that the artists really thought about embodied experience and then used the neighborhood, almost annotated the neighborhood as an exhibit to be able to illustrate the ideas. They gave a lot of consideration to things like, do you use your cell phone, or do you actually have an exchange with people? There was sound involved. There was ways of activating. But I also think in our own spaces and inside the museum, we've just been working on drawing and observation, and getting people to notice and sit down and slow down. I mean, some people are conversational. Some people, like dialogue like this. So I think it's really important to have a wide range of approaches to meet learners where they are.
Yeah, well, Ashlyn or Whitney.
Sure.
Lisa.
So I actually teach strategic design at Parsons, and one of the, so I'm taking a lot from that class into my job, and so I can't really say that we are at a point where we are able to sort of encourage participation from the public based on the strategic design framework that we are working on for sustainability right now, but we will get to that point. Internally, though, we are building in opportunities for feedback quite often as we iterate and test and iterate and test. These ideas that are coming not just from the green team, but from staff, from other stakeholders that really do add to our sustainability progress. And then, we're looking at I am looking at different points of leverage that could get us to the point where we are seeing this implementation of this idea of sustainability really being embedded in the culture of our institution. And so those feedback loops look like obviously surveys, but also training and sort of reflective moments where we're witnessing the implementation of the skill sets that are gained from trainings and workshops in the process of exhibition making or the process of material sourcing. And we are also relying on our external partners to provide feedback for us, and also to give them feedback on the ways that we can work more collaboratively on mitigating our impact overall. So we have a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I don't have any projects that have made it to kind of the exhibition stage yet. Actually, one of the first historic sites that I talked to about interpreting climate crisis history was Ironbridge, the one in England, because their executive director talked with some press when he was first hired, I think 2019, about wanting to shift their narrative. It was one of the first historic sites that I saw that was actually talking about acknowledging, their historic resources as part of the history of the climate crisis. So, sorry guys. So anyway, when I talked to Ironbridge, I was asking, so yeah, what kind of exhibitions do you guys have kind of in development? And Nick, who is the exhibitions and learning director, was like, no, like exhibitions take way too long to develop. I mean, especially at history museums, but I think also any kind of big institutions, like these are projects that take years and years and so much research. And he was like, we're not, my goal is to start doing more programming as kind of a way of proving this as a concept that our institution can hold this narrative, and then eventually we can look at it at exhibitions. So that's really what I've been working on with sites, is either working through public programming or working through like educational programming with children. And I think, especially with kids, there's a big, I think, an imperative to have it be participatory because of learning engagement. But yeah, these are kinds of the things that I'm thinking about with programs.
So really thinking about this multisensory approach, connecting to a sense of place, both inside and outside, thinking about constant feedback to really emphasize the process, and then thinking about dialogue and how that plays into it. I think those are some really great themes that emerge. And that last point in terms of engagement, Ashlyn, that you brought up, I want to dig into that term a little bit more, because I know it's like the name of your degree program, but it's also a term that gets thrown around, like the idea of public engagement in many different contexts. And I did read a paper recently in the science communication sphere that is suggesting that public engagement is just the latest buzzword. So I'd love to dig into how each of you interpret what engagement means to you. So Ashlyn, maybe I'll throw it back to you first, because especially as you're thinking about children, what does it mean to engage children?
Yeah, I think I'll actually, can I talk about a different historic site?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think engagement is about just thinking beyond the walls of the museum in all kinds of ways, and I think climate can be a tricky and sometimes overwhelming topic to kind of make connections through. But at the Elms, which was the coal baron's mansion that I had on one of my slides, I worked with them on building, I kind of did a demonstration project where I showed them how they could incorporate climate crisis history into their existing audio tour, which they did not do, but they are working on a new AR tour of the Elms and augmented reality. And they're going to incorporate climate crisis history into that. And part of the research that I did was to connect the history of the building with the history of extraction, which if you're talking about coal mining, there's a lot of history research that's been done about miners and mining communities, and that's actually a really well-documented historical subject. So the Elms has really gotten interested in connecting with the mining communities that Berwind, the coal baron, employed, essentially, in Pennsylvania. So his mansion's in Rhode Island, but they're partnering now with a very small history institution in Windber, which is a town he founded, his name backwards, in case you didn't notice. And they're essentially touting this small historical institution on their tours and doing some kind of collaborative programming and telling this narrative and just trying to make this connection across space and time and send some of their audience, some of their reach to that smaller community. So that's one, I think.
That's really interesting. Marina, I might throw the question to you next, because you have a very concrete approach to engagement. How do you define it? How do you measure it?
Yeah, measuring's the hard part. But I mean, the way I think about engagement, I think about individual subjectivities. I think about collective subjectivities. I think that I'm very interested in inquiry-based learning and the way in which, like, ideally you kind of want to be in dialogue, and the visitor brings so much to any experience, and so we're there to kind of be in exchange. So when you open an exhibition, it's really like the starting point. It's when the conversation begins, so we've been building participation more directly into our projects, not add an education component later, but really try to integrate our approaches as we develop a project. I just think it needs to be layered. Speaking about children or intergenerational audiences, I like projects that have a little bit of something for everyone, so that the person who wants to go really deep, their curiosity and intellect will be met, but then there's also something, for a young children to delight and meet their curiosity. I mean, I also think we need to think about tone, so sometimes something should be humorous and light, sometimes things need to be serious, and sometimes things need to be thought-provoking and edgy, and so we just need to, people are so different, right? And, pop culture engages some people while others are bookish, so I feel like museums, the best way to offer a rich range of things is to work with a rich range of people on your staff, and the Academy really is a kind of microcosm of the city in that we have really every neighborhood represented on our staff, and so I think the diversity of your staff also, of course, is important for meeting a wide range of audiences. So I have a lot to say about engagement. We could talk for a long time about that.
Whitney, do you want to build off of that a little bit? Because I think what you were talking about, the diversity of people on your staff, really leads to diversity in strategies for engagement. And I think that's especially important, with climate, because it affects so many different people in different ways. I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more about what you've learned from working with that cross-disciplinary team.
Yes, exactly. Engagement is the way that I measure really the impact of the work that we're doing in sustainability. The value of the sustainability commitment is really measured by the level of engagement that we receive. And, traditionally we have been, as many organizations are, siloed, each department sort of works autonomously. And so a huge challenge for us, those of us on the green team and those of us at our sustainability leadership group, has been to elevate the work that was happening in the departments, which was really remarkable, and create this cross-departmental collaborative culture. And the engagement really has to be consistent. So that's where the feedback loops and the constant iterative approaches to this work comes in, because it has to build upon, and people have to really see the demonstrable results, which is a challenge because I am focused on long-term strategy, but I still have to keep folks engaged. And so there's this kind of in-between, between the low-hanging fruit, we'll put a recycling bin in that tower, or, we'll change these signs to reflect our commitment to sustainability, but what are the more substantial efforts that we're making, and what are the impacts that those efforts reflect, so that we can get to those long-term goals and keep everyone sort of happy. So it's a challenge. I don't really have an answer, but we're working on it.
And I guess, Joyce, that notion of sustained engagement is a question I would ask to you, because these really wonderful exhibitions, what happens next? How do you continue that engagement with the community?
Right. From our institution's perspective, engagement means we provide a circumstance where people come and think about it, provide another way of thinking about the issue. We hosted 2 community dinners this year, because this invasive species involved a lot of different constituencies, organizations including SEPTA, City of Philadelphia, Rail Park, CCP, everyone bringing different perspectives, different opinions in terms of urban planning, urban design, preservation, safety, ecology, ecosystem. So this the dinner was really good because collaborative process really informed shared definitions and understanding around the issue, and help us set a goal for the next steps, what we want to do with the cut, with the rail park, how we want to use it, and how we are going to open it to the public in the near future. So I think this type of sustained engagement between different constituencies really help us open up the conversation to the next level.
That's really great, and having this shared future goal to work towards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have lots of questions, but I'm sure you do too. At this point, I'd like to invite anybody in the audience who has a question, just raise your hand and somebody will bring you a mic. I'd also like to invite anybody on the live stream to throw questions in the chat, and we'll circle back to those maybe after this first question. There's a question up front here. Please don't fall down the steps.
Thank you. And I'm glad I'm asking the first question because it kind of follows up on what we were just talking about. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Jamie McCrae. I work with the National Wildlife Federation. And one of the things that I think about a lot is this community engagement and process. So I'm interested in how you all are facilitating the dialogue between the scientists and the artists as you all are developing these programs and exhibits, and when in the process are you actually engaging the community? Do you start some of those conversations at the beginning? Is it all, we have an exhibition, we have a program, and now we'd like you to join? I'm curious about your process in these different spaces.
Who wants to take a crack at that first? Go ahead, Whitney.
Thank you for that question. I think a very clear example is our second carbon study that we did in collaboration with the artist Cecilia Vicuña. And the collaboration was really born from Cecilia's interest in the work that we were already doing, but also how we could expand that and take it further. So we worked with an organization called Art into Acres, which really helped us on the data side. And I believe there are scientists on that side as well. But it's a scientific approach to the data collection. And from there, we were able to identify a reforestation project in Chile, which Cecilia also helped us identify, where we donated funding for that reforestation project. And it culminated into a report that we published on our website. And we also have done subsequent programming with Cecilia Vicuña through our education department. That is where we invite certain radical thinkers, change makers in the grassroots organizing space in New York City to do certain workshops with Cecilia Vicuña. So that's just it's sort of how we've engaged both the sort of scientific side of things and the more artistic side, but that really culminated into my decision to codify our sustainability commitment in our living artist agreements so that our living artists are now aware of our climate commitment and also are invited to collaborate with us as we continue to track these data points across the exhibitions and invite them to also think through ways that we can sort of amplify this work and make it go even further.
I can share too. So, the Academy of Natural Sciences, we have staff, scientists on our staff, and so most of the projects that we do are in close collaboration with them. So, for example, I mentioned how to get to the river. that idea of watershed thinking was inspired by one of our staff, Lynn Perez, who said, well, watershed is just around you everywhere. And literally the artistic team had a watershed moment. And they ran outside and they started to just think about the built environment that way. And then, wow, and that was really where the idea took off. Conversations with birds, that was working with our ornithology department, and the staff scientists were part of the team, even helping advise on the text, because that's an area where we have to really get things right, the language. And so, but we always have a little bit of back and forth on that, and I'm sure artists who have worked, I'm looking at Diane Burko there, artists who've worked closely with scientists know, that, and I just have to make a point that artists and humanists are vitally needed in this work, since I'm talking to a museum studies program. And so any of you who have that interest in interdisciplinarity, it's vital that you participate in these kinds of, in this kind of work. So I just want to encourage you. And
I can say that to be wary of any scientist who doesn't appreciate that.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Scientists you want to be working with.
Yeah. And you asked about community participation, and that also is becoming more and more important in our work, the idea of co-creation. And so, we're happy to have some people on our staff that are new, that are experts in that. Ryan Strand Greenberg is a curator in the city and specializes in that. And so more and more our projects are kind of are looking toward to doing that. That takes a special kind of talent and a gifts in facilitation. I'd also just mention a really cool project that the Academy just got funding for, which is called the Science Shop. And the idea is based in a project in the 70s that's still going in the UK, where members of the museum work in a neighborhood, set up shop and say, well, what issues you're facing and how can we help? And again, because we're part of Drexel University, group will come to us and say, it's lead in our water. And so then we will look into ways in which we can set them up for addressing it, whether that's working with lawyers or understanding the problem with engineers or biogeochem scientists. So that's kind of an exciting development, is that the Academy is moving more and more into that kind of realm of, it's a field called participatory action, research, and learning. So, yeah.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, a couple in the middle there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that very engaging and inspiring talk. I'm really glad to hear all the work that you are doing. I kind of have a half-formulated question that I hope will come out in some intelligible way by the end of this. But I'm a practicing artist, and I do have questions for everyone here. I'm not going to ask them all, but I'm trying to just ask one that I think would be maybe everyone might have a response to, but I'm thinking specifically of the work you're doing, Whitney, at the Guggenheim Museum. But just as a practicing artist, I sometimes just get a little frustrated that there are systems that I, as a producing artist, am implicated in and complicit in, that are very harmful for the environment, because I have a studio and I produce work, and not everything I make is successful, so that becomes waste. And I'm also in a globalized art market that has traveling exhibitions and art fair, like a really crazy global art fair schedule, and all this stuff requires shipping and packaging, and a lot of it produces so much waste. So I guess I'm wondering if there's anything in these conversations you're having, these interdisciplinary conversations between these various departments that is able to wrap their head around the kind of systemic change that would be required to change how art is, I guess, produced and exhibited to become more sustainable and produce less waste. I know that's like a really big question, which is why I'm hoping that somebody up there could help me with it a little bit.
Whoa. Whitney, please solve the world's problems.
I will solve the world's problems right now.
But I guess it's just something that we all feel because we all order stuff and it comes in packaging and it's packed in plastic and we have to throw that away, and we know recycling is kind of a fiction, and so I just don't know if we're at a point where that can even be really addressed in these conversations. And I don't mean to take attention away from all the great work that you're clearly doing within the institution, but maybe if you could speak on that a little bit would be great.
Oh, thank you so much for your question. I think that your inquiry is the foundation of this work, and this is the perfect time to address that. We're not at a point yet as an industry, as you've identified, where we can really apply the solutions that are coming from smaller enterprises around like shipping and packaging and travel and material sourcing, and really, you know, expanding on that big picture question about what is the point of all of this in the first place, and how helpful and how sustainable can the art industry truly be. So yes, these are questions that we are grappling with every day, especially these are the things that keep me up at night. But I'm really encouraged by the momentum that I have witnessed and been a part of in this sector. I know that my colleagues at certain galleries are making strides to use sea freight more often for their shipping, and they are applying like carbon taxes for acquisitions. There are groups like Key Culture, Julie's Bicycle, the Gallery Climate Coalition, who are really looking at this work at a granular level to sort of pair the industry with sort of startups and other folks who are innovating in this space to make it more sustainable. I have introduced my colleagues to a lot of change makers in this space through trainings and workshops so that they can make decisions based on the knowledge that they are acquiring from these folks. I'm encouraged to see, even in the packing and shipping sector, how artists are responding to this and sort of creating modular pieces that, you know, don't necessarily have to take up so much of a footprint if they do have to travel by air, or you know, the choices that artists are making when it comes to the materials that they're using. You know, and then there's that layer of, yeah, well, all this shit is expensive, so like, how am I gonna do that? So, you know, there's so many different considerations that are really at play in this conversation, but I do want to assure you that we are actively looking at this, and I think this is the most collaborative space that I've ever worked in. So, you know, I've formed a coalition with the Whitney, the Met, the MoMA, Brooklyn Museum, Studio Museum, where we're all looking at our choices for exhibition making and how we're even maintaining our buildings and facilities so that we can share best practices and hopefully amplify that to the general public once we arrive at some solutions. But so far, this type of input is very necessary, and I encourage you to continue to speak out about this. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's Right, I think that your concern really goes beyond art as well. It's the choices that we all face, about the impact of our everyday individual consumer choices versus trying to advocate for systemic change. So I think there's a bigger lesson to be learned from the example that you gave, Whitney. Do you have any questions from our online folks? Okay, so maybe we have time for one more question before we wrap up. I thought I saw another question. Yeah, up there.
I have a question about made me think about how do we talk about this subject, and in some of there's like I feel like there could be a heavy hand and there are smaller hands, and I feel like institutions represent something that's not always exhibitions there. It's just in the area. Some exhibitions are in areas that have been impacted by lead poisoning you were talking about. They have high rates of asthma. So I feel like made me sort of thinking about the idea of climate change when you're talking about Iron Bridge. Got me an idea of like, this is kind of, it's been happening. It isn't a recent predicament. We've always been engaged in affecting our environment. Some of them are more immediate rather than globally, but now it's definitely globally, but it's always been impactful. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about like soft approaches and how you would foresee that be implemented? That won't, I'm thinking about, I have a community in mind, and then I'm doing that won't cause resistance. And also I was thinking of like what you were reading here, there was a section about the public statements regarding environment, which made me thinking about land acknowledgements. So I'm just wondering about how institutions should be talking about it in your eyes, and when I look at you represent each different types of institutions with different constituencies. So maybe I'm curious about your approaches to that, to the local as well as kind of the global. So, no, I'm sorry, that's a lot. But.
I'm wondering, Ashlyn, if you wanted to try answering that first, because you've sort of worked in these different communities with the different histories.
Yeah, I feel like I'm hearing two main things in your question. One is, how do you talk about these subjects when it's already like, to a population that it's already sensitive to it, and to talk about it gently and productively. And then I also feel like I heard, maybe on the other end, how do you talk about this in communities where there might be resistance to, acknowledging anthropogenic climate change or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think moving forward collaboratively, to answer the first kind of question, one model that I haven't been involved in, but I really admire is this project Climates of Inequality that is run out of Rutgers, Newark, their public history program, where they're working with communities who are frontline communities for climate change, and also dealing with all kinds of different environmental issues, like more local environmental issues, like contamination, like climate-related flooding, bringing up contamination from the industry that also created the climate crisis, that kind of thing. And they're creating public history exhibitions with these community and academic teams where they work really closely together. So I think that's not an approach I've been able to use yet. It sounds like a little bit of what's going on with some of my other panelists. But I think that that's a really important way of addressing history, and especially in the kind of situations I think you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And then the second part of your question I felt like was like this resistance question, and I think about that a lot because I feel like history museums have a sort of reputation for being fairly conservative and moving really slowly, especially around topics that could be perceived as political, and climate change has been politicized intentionally by fossil fuel interests. So here we are. And that's why I think it's so important to separate sort of like the workers and the individuals who were around and mining coal or working in a cotton mill, not talk about it as essentially like a blame game for people that were around back then, and actually be really proud of the kind of change they lived through. And this is kind of what I was talking about before, like seeing their adaptability to massive shifts in society around industrialization as a template for how we can all sort of live through what it will be another, and just as widespread energy transition that is going to have, unforeseen and foreseen impacts on us socially, culturally, et cetera. So really being proud of that history still, I think, is possible. I think that's really important. Like this is, we are in America are super proud of our history of innovation, our history of like pushing boundaries, like not taking this is impossible as an answer, like, and I think that's all stuff that history museums like to bring up. It's very patriotic, and I think we can use that, is what I'm saying. And I think you can use history to talk about some of these things, to talk next to some of these topics without triggering people that might have resistance to talking about the climate crisis in other contexts.
I have to just say that the UArts students are super lucky that Ashlyn's going to teach a class here this on tours, and I think that I wish I could sign up to take it. I might have to audit it, but I want to also I think your question is really interesting, and I've been working on a project outside of the academy that's called Street Work that has to do with the tree canopy in Philadelphia, and it's with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society and lots of community partners. And the premise of the project had to do with the issue of low tree canopy in certain neighborhoods. And we know that those neighborhoods map onto histories of structural racism having to do with redlining historically. And as we kind of entered into the process, the project, and Future Farmers, this international art and design collective, are the lead artists on the project, we kind of went about a community kind of conversation, very nonlinear, lots of research, and through this very convoluted process partly, we came to making drums out of fallen trees that we play in neighborhoods when trees are planted. And this comes out of, Philadelphia's incredible history of music. It comes out of conversations around the Sun Ra Orchestra and Sun Ra himself, the ancient infinity lightning drum, which was made right in Germantown, where our main space is, the Arboretum. And Eugene Liu, who's here as a drummer. There's been amazing collaborators in the project that have just kind of come together in this very organic, almost community-based way. And but through joy, I would say, we've got to come through joy towards celebrating what we've been calling summoning the future forest. And so, in a way like this, talking about climate change very obliquely, not, usually Pennsylvania Horticulture Society will talk about trees in terms of environmental services, carbon sequestration, and these practical things. And that resonates for many people. You know, there's an incredible dedicated core of people called tree tenders that plant trees biannually. But for other people, you need a different language, you know, and for some of us, the arts, you know, and partly, you know, music and the arts, the beauty of that is they speak a different language. So it resonates emotionally and spiritually, and there's a lot of things that can't be articulated that have to do with pain and histories. So I feel like, you know, I've learned a lot through that project. Yeah.
Joyce, I just wanted to invite you to add your thoughts as well, because this conversation is reminding me of the values that you identified in your project about sort of like who's in, who's out. I'm going to wrap us up here.
Yeah, so my organization, we are a mid-sized community-based art center. So our mission is very clear, represent the underrepresented communities and make their voice heard, them, especially those whose voices might have been neglected by institutional authority. So in that way, when we are working with a lot of when we are cultivating institutional partnerships through our project, we try to have a lot of conversation and try to hear different feedback around the issue. And I think having the conversation is really important first step to make to make sure that everyone's on the same page. But of course, there are sometimes different opinions and different perspectives. But it really depends on, I think, what the institution's goal is and what direction we want to take with the project we are presenting.
Yeah, so starting to identify all those shared values at the heart of the conversation rather than sort of starting with, this must be the change that we have to effect. Well, thank you all so much for your insights tonight.
Thank you.
I think what's really cool about what's emerged from the conversation is that, you know, just like we know from, you know, the larger conversation about climate change, you know, the solutions in museums take many different forms. We've got different scales, different time frames, different audiences, different communities, and it's going to take all of that. But by working together, obviously we can enhance our collective impact. I hope all of you are as inspired by this conversation as I am. I think it certainly brings me hope and joy about what we can accomplish together. You know, for all of the students who are out there, hopefully this gives you some ideas for, you know, how you can apply these ideas and principles as you move forward into your careers and in different projects. So I'll wrap up our conversation and turn it back to Daniel to close us out.
Yeah, let's just give everybody a round of applause. Yeah, thanks so much for stewarding that, Jatri, and for the speakers for joining us. So hopefully you can hang out, chat with some of the speakers for a little bit. Again, you know, easiest way to keep in touch is you can follow UArts Museum Studies on Instagram or get in touch with me if you want to come to future events. And otherwise, there's a lot of great knowledge and experience in this room, so hopefully you get to meet some people and look forward to staying in touch. So thanks so much for being here, and thanks again to our panel.